Coming up on Network Africa, Muslims all over the world begin observing the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. Libyan militia leader Khalifa Haftar urges his forces to step up their offensive against the capital Tripoli, hours after the United Nations called for a ceasefire. Plus, the United Nations warns of a huge humanitarian crisis in Somalia if the drought currently afflicting the country is not contained. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Tenyola Shobowale. Muslims all over the world have started the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. In Kenya, Chief Judge Hamed Muda announced the start of Ramadan on Sunday evening, saying the moon had been sighted in the market town of Hola in Tana River County. However, in some countries like Morocco, Ramadan will start this evening. On Sunday evening, Morocco's Ministry of Religious Affairs said the moon had not been sighted in the country. Ramadan is regarded as the most sacred month in the Islamic calendar, when Muslims say extra prayers at night and fast from dawn to sunset if they are in good health. Now, here in Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari has felicitated with all citizens in general and Muslims in particular as they commence the month-long Ramadan fast. In a statement by his senior special assistant on media and publicity, Mr. Garba Shehu, President Buhari called for the continued peace, progress and prosperity of the country. The president notes that Islam is a religion of peace that upholds the values of tolerance and mutual coexistence without a place for hatred and violence. He therefore urges Muslims to use the fasting period to build a relationship of friendship and harmony with citizens of other faiths. Now to our main story. Libyan militia leader Khalifa Haftar has urged his forces to step up their offensive against the capital Tripoli, hours after the United Nations called for a ceasefire. The UN appealed for a humanitarian truce to coincide with the start of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan on Monday. But General Haftar called on his supporters to increase the determination and strength of their assault. Since he launched the attack on southern Tripoli a month ago, tens of thousands of civilians have fled their homes. On Saturday, the Islamic State group militants claimed responsibility for an attack on a training camp for the forces of General Haftar. Hospital officials say 9 people were killed in the attack in Libya's southern city of Sabah. Let's get more on this story now from security expert Chidi Nwaonu. Thanks for joining us on Network Africa. So what do you make of General Haftar's message urging his troops to step up their offensive against the capital, especially in the month of Ramadan?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. Well, the message obviously is kind of counterintuitive, in that, as you've mentioned, the month of Ramadan usually is where in Islamic countries you would generally have a ceasefire or there'd be some sort of peace initiative. But Haftar is now trying to, increase the pressure. This is a form of psychological warfare on his opponents, in which to say, it doesn't matter what's happening. This is my objective, and this is how I'm going to keep pursuing it. But at the same time, you will find there will most likely be some sort of negotiations going on in which he's trying to message to other parties, the Western powers, Russia, the Middle East and other Middle Eastern countries, that there are other paths that he's following towards getting the outcome he desires.
Yeah, usually Ramadan is regarded as the month of peace, but he is calling for sustained violence during this time. But what can religious leaders and even the Libyan government do to sustain peace during this period?
Well, in the case of Libya, it's a bit difficult because the Libyan government is a government in name only. It's only a collection of militias that's been recognized by the UN. So it doesn't have control of the country. It doesn't have control of most of the economy. So it can't really do much. Religious leaders, again, are just kind of an adjunct to this. This is about power, whoever has the raw power. And Haftar has a lot of power in that he has, a militia. He has a lot of backers from other countries. So it's whoever is the most powerful. I don't think there's any other body that can really arbitrate this beyond the people who support either party.
Okay, on Saturday, militants from the Islamic State attacked a training camp for the forces of General Haftar. Chidi, what impact is this likely to have on the offensive against Tripoli?
So that attack, again, is quite interesting because obviously one of Haftar's selling points was that he has defeated the Islamic State. He has secured, the south and the oil-producing areas. So this is another way for IS or IS militants, or even just militants that IS might have paid to reassert that A, they're not defeated, and also to put pressure on Haftar, ensure that his flanks are not secure. So he might either have to hurry up his offensive and complete it before this threat mutates, or it might be just something that he would look at and say, okay, this proves what I'm fighting against. He could use this as propaganda to say IS is in support of the government. So it's just another factor in a very, very complicated conflict.
Yeah, time and time again we discuss the conflict in Libya. Libya collapsed into chaos after the toppling of Gaddafi in 2011. But why is it so difficult to restore peace in the country, despite several efforts by the international community?
Well, I think, when you talk about things like this, you go back to the Colin Powell's doctrine, at the end of the first Gulf War in Iraq. If you break it, you own it. And Libya, like many African countries, is much more complex than what we see on the surface. There's many conflicting tribes, there's many conflicting interests that have all been put together, by colonial powers, have been held together, more or less by force. And once that force is broken and nothing replaces it, this is what you get chaos. So it's going to be something that's going to be, unfortunately, long and a bit brutal and a bit bloody until somebody emerges as the overall commander, or at least there will be two discernible camps of two strong warlords on either side of Libya. And that's what's going to happen. It's not going to be something that people are going to sit down and negotiate until one side agrees that they're not strong enough to win.
All right, then, security expert Chidi Nwaonu, thank you for your thoughts and analysis on that issue.
Thanks for having me.
Moving on, the International Organization for Migration says children are among over 2,000 African migrants rounded up and detained in a football stadium in Yemen. The IOM spokesperson in Yemen, Olivia Hedden, says the migrants, mostly from Ethiopia, Somalia and Djibouti, are being held in Aden, Abyan and Laj in southern Yemen. She adds that the migrants were on their way to Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries and were apprehended at military checkpoints and brought to football stadiums and a military camp. Yemen has been devastated by a conflict that escalated in March 2015 when the rebel Houthi group seized control of much of the west of the country. The war has killed tens of thousands of people and put Yemen on the brink of famine. The International Criminal Court has announced that Jordan will not be referred to the UN Security Council for failing to arrest the former Sudanese president Omar al-Bashir on war crime charges. The split decision by the 5-judge panel reverses a previous decision by the ICC, but the court did uphold a reprimand of Jordan for not arresting Mr. Bashir in 2017 when he attended an Arab League summit in Amman, despite there being 2 international warrants for his arrest.
The appeal chamber finds Judge Ibanez and Judge Bosa dissenting that Jordan's notable of the 28th of March 2017 need not be seen as an advance notification of non-compliance. It is enough to see it as Jordan's way of identifying head of state immunity and the lack of its waiver by Sudan as perceived impediments to the request for Mr. al-Bashir's arrest and surrender, in relation to which consultation should take place.
Sudanese mediators facilitating talks between the army and protest leaders are proposing that the country have 2 transition councils, with one led by generals overseeing security. The mediators' apparent proposal comes as talks over forming an overall governing council remain deadlocked, with the existing military council and protest leaders offering different visions after President Omar al-Bashir was deposed last month. Thousands of protesters remain encamped outside the army headquarters in Khartoum, demanding the current 10-member army council that took power after the ousting of Bashir be replaced by a civilian administration. The current army council has so far resisted handing over power to civilians. The VOA's Naba Mohidin joins us live on the program to tell us more about this. Thank you, Naba, for joining us. How are protesters reacting to the proposal from Mediators to have two councils, one led by civilians and the other by the military?
Protesters are so angry and staying in the sit-in because they said that military council has no right to form any type of councils. And part of opposition groups used to be aligned with the Bashir regime also is trying to steal the revolution, as protesters saying. So they are so angry and they think that a lot of countries are affecting the decisions of making the two councils to just defuse the protesters.
Well, Muslims all over the world have begun observing the holy month of Ramadan. How is this likely to affect the ongoing protest in the country?
The protest is still the same. The sit-in is still the same. Protesters, because the temperature is so high, now they have tents with air cons, and they are preparing to stay the whole month of Ramadan, despite of the heat and despite of army sometimes is trying to disperse them, but they are in the sit-in place, having the whole month in the sit-in place as they are planning.
Okay, Naba. Last week, Sudan's public prosecutor ordered the questioning of ousted President Omar al-Bashir on suspicion of money laundering and financing terrorism. What more can you tell us about this?
Yes, General Prosecutor, he said that Bashir was on trial on Sunday for those accuses, but the defense committee of al-Bashir said that he should not be on trial because there is no proof about this. And the money that was found in suitcase in his home. So the proof to judiciary system, there is proofs, but for the defense committee of al-Bashir saying that there is no enough proofs to accuse him or put him on trial, and this is argument between the general prosecutor and the defense committee. But journalists and media and observers cannot be on details on this. They just issue a written communique saying that we have investigating with al-Bashir, we said this, and defense committee said this. But the street, the protest, the opposition groups is not aware or not sure that if everything is just like they said. But the TMC spokesman said that they will allow journalists and some of the people who work in the humanitarian field, they will allow them to see al-Bashir and to be on trial, to witness it.
All right, VOA's Naba Mohidin, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Now, the United Nations is warning that the harsh drought conditions currently afflicting much of Somalia is likely to trigger a major humanitarian crisis if urgent action is not taken to contain the situation. Last year, a drought spanning 4 consecutive below-average rainy seasons left about 6.2 million people in need of emergency aid such as food, water and shelter. That prompted the UN to launch an aid appeal of $1.6 billion to help address the crisis.
While assessing the effects of the prolonged drought on vulnerable populations in Baidoa, the acting Deputy Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General for Somalia, George Conway, warns of a looming humanitarian crisis.
Major challenge right now is the underfunding of the 2019 humanitarian response plan. Currently in May, only funded to 19% for the year, which is very worrying with the current extent of the humanitarian crisis that's evolving as we see it now. And this requires strong advocacy with donor and financing partners to expand and take the humanitarian response back to scale so we don't find ourselves in Somalia in a situation where people are moving increasingly into crisis and potentially over the edge from crisis into a more disastrous condition.
According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, drought conditions in the 2018-2019 rainy season have led to an increase in the number of people designated as food insecure in Somalia since October last year.
Still to come on the program. Dozens of people die in a fuel tanker explosion in Niger. Please stay with us.